This button just, push this button just once. And a little red light will come on.
That one. Okay.
Mr. Chair, we're ready to go.
Yeah, I was looking at it. Okay. Thank you.
Hey, this is Phil. I'll be joining you via Zoom, but I'll be there in person shortly.
Okay. We'll call the meeting of the Planning Commission to order this May 18th, 2022. Would staff call roll, please?
Brian Parsons.
Here.
Lynn Larson,
Here.
Paul Wegman,
Present.
Ryan Pearson,
Here.
Don Daniels,
Here.
Phil Combs.
Present.
You do have quorum.
How about Mr. Estrada?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Robert Estrada.
We shunned him. He's on the wrong side.
Okay, great. Before us, we have the minutes of May 4th, 2022. I am looking for a motion.
Motion to approve.
Mr. Larson made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Parsons made a second. Any discussion or changes? Hearing or seeing none at this time. All those in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed, abstentions? Hearing none, the minutes pass as written for May 4th, 2022. Any changes to our agenda tonight?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. We'll move to number 5, public comment. Today, anyone wishing to speak on any topic other than the public hearings that we have coming up today. So anyone wishing to speak at this time under public comment, I'll open it up. Do we have anyone online?
There are several individuals, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if they're here for the public hearings or for general public comment. So I'll ask that question of any of those that are in as attendees. Please raise your hand if you wish to comment under general public comment, and we'll open your ability to speak. And none of them have done that, so I'm assuming
Okay.
they're here for the public hearings.
Okay, anyone in the audience wishing to speak under public comment? Great, thank you. So we'll go ahead and close the public comment at this time. And we'll move to number 6, public hearing. And we'll do the first one, Meadow Park project.
We've turned this over quickly to Mr. Rodriguez.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. I'm Ramon Rodriguez, the Associate Planner at the City and the project lead for the proposal we are discussing tonight. Everyone should be familiar with the Meadow Park 55 development as we discussed the project in the last study session held on May 4th, 2022. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to decide Meadow Park 55's proposal to utilize the Housing Incentive Program. Under the Housing Incentive Program, the applicant's requesting a density bonus of 9 dwelling units in exchange for 6 extremely low-income affordable units. The hearing is specifically to review the applicant's request to utilize the Housing Incentive Program. With the exception of the request to utilize a 9 dwelling unit density bonus, the project is allowed outright within the zoning district. Denial of the applicant's request to utilize the city's Housing Incentive Program will not deny the applicant's ability to build a 54 multifamily development. Staff supports the applicant's request to utilize the city's Housing Incentive Program. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Great, thank you. No questions? Okay, at this time, we'll open up the public comment, the public hearing on the Meadow Park project. Anyone wishing to speak tonight before us on the Meadow Park project? Anyone that's online, if you just raise your hand on this public hearing. Alex Hancock, Chris Pfeiffer, or John Ficker. Seeing no one at this time, Anyone in the audience wishing to speak under public hearing for the Meadow Park project? Okay, so at this time, we will close the public hearing on the Meadow Park project. And we'll move to the next public hearing. Sorry, which is, sorry, screen just went out. Just one moment. The computer went asleep.
This is the public hearing regarding the 2022 comprehensive plan amendments.
I see it right in front of me.
Okay.
Okay, great. We'll have the public hearing of the 2022 comprehensive plan amendment cycle.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I will have a few comments to make because one item in particular was not discussed at last study session, but it is included in your packet this evening. So there are a total of 7 amendments that are under consideration this year. This is the result of the city council taking action last fall to create a docket list. And then there's been a series of discussions held here at the Planning Commission since January on a number of them each session since January, essentially, because there's been such a wide variety of topics and some of them are pretty lengthy. So what we are also doing is working our way through the SEPA analysis process and Department of Commerce notification that's ongoing. And this evening is the public hearing, as was mentioned, for the Planning Commission. The 7 amendments, as you see here in summary, first would be to rezone one parcel near St. Clair Hospital in order to preserve the Gary Oak stand that is there, as was intended when the master plan for that campus was adopted. Second is a review of the 2011 Tilikum neighborhood plan and also the Tilikum Center of Local Importance. Third is a look at the housing chapter within the city's comprehensive plan and potentially amendments related to that in Lakewood Municipal Code Title 18A. Fourth is a review of the status of adult family homes being located or not within the Air Corridor 1 and 2 zones. Fifth is looking at the comprehensive plan's text and essentially a technical update to recognize adoption of Vision 2050 versus 2040, and also renaming centers of local importance per some multi-county planning policies that have changed. The sixth is to update a number of obsolete maps within the comprehensive plan. And then the last item is the parking analysis that was done for the citywide and also specific to Lakewood Station District sub-area plan regulations. So very quickly, the one parcel is notified here or indicated here by arrows. It is for the most part parking, but as you can see, particularly on the aerial view on the right, there are a number of trees on this parcel. And so the intention is again to rezone in order to preserve those trees. The second is probably the most complicated of all of the amendments this year. And there's 4 different recommendations that are before you this evening from the department. First is to adopt an addendum to the Tilikum neighborhood plan that just recognizes the work that's been accomplished, either completed or is ongoing between 2011 and now. The second is to take a look at the rezoning. There's a couple of options presented in the materials for this evening. The recommendation is option 2 from staff, coupled with the 2 private applications, one from Habitat for Humanity and one from the Silcox Island Corporation. The third recommendation is to go ahead and rename and also create new boundaries for the Tilikum Center. And then fourth, there's just a minor amendment to Title 18A once more to recognize some of these changes. So this is option 2, as was recommended. If you'll remember option 1, if you were to look at this same picture, essentially the box off to the right that's in red would be not changing. It would remain R3, but there would be some changes in the bottom southwest, sorry, diamond, if you will. There would be fewer parcels being rezoned essentially. This is a map on the left that's the existing center of local importance in Tilikum. The one on the right is the proposed changed boundaries. So you'll see it's an expansion in order to reflect if those rezones were to occur that you just saw, and also to recognize the changes that are happening because of the Thorn Lane and Berkeley interchanges with I-5 that are in Tilikum and how that is starting to change some of the land uses. And that was recognized in last year's comp plan cycle. This is just the first page of the addendum. This is, see if I can, I don't think I can show it any better than that, sorry. it starts with just an explanation of what's happened since 2011 in text, and then you'll see in tables the summary of what has been completed out of the implementation actions, what are ongoing, and those that have not yet started. And there's also a recommendation that this actually be picked up as part of the larger periodic review of the entire city comprehensive plan in 2024, because it's obvious on reading the plan itself, it is significantly out of date. It's talking about many things that have been completed, and there's been a number of changes of circumstance. So it's time to take a look at that sub-area plan again. This is the minor text amendment I referenced. Should at some point the city want to adopt a chapter of development regs specific to this sub-area, similar to what happened in downtown in the Lakewood Station District, this is just setting aside that code. The third amendment is related again to the housing review that's being done right now by a consultant. And the recommendation for the Planning Commission tonight is that this actually be continued to next year. Just because of the scope of the review, they're just barely getting started. It's a pretty hefty project, and so it's not going to be ready this year. The fourth amendment, again, that adult family homes one, this was not talked about at the last study session. This was pulled by city staff for additional discussion and review internally. And so tonight, I'll just spend a little bit more time here. You've got on the left hand just a zoning map that shows you where AC1 and AC2 are located in the city. They are directly north of Joint Base Lewis McCord's North Airfield and its flight pattern. On the right, you see the same area in aerial view, so you see that it is fully developed. And as it sits now, it is mostly residential development. I'm sorry, you can't see the top of this because of Zoom in any event. This is the explanation that the city is providing to what recommendation ultimately is in the packet for you this evening. All of the residential uses in AC1 and 2 are non-conforming. The plan has been by the city to have these eventually be relocated essentially to other parts of the city. So there would not be residential development in either air corridor zone in the future. This is not only because of Department of Defense and FAA air safety guidance, but there's also state statute and multi-county planning policies regarding being compatible with military installations. And Lakewood obviously is immediately adjacent to Joint Base Lewis McCord. So there are about 1,800 non-conforming housing units in these two zones that are intended eventually to go away, for lack of a better way to describe it, and future residential units will not be included in this area, not be allowed in this area, I should say. There's also discussion in the state statute. Here you see the reference to 71, 128, 140, talking about how an adult family home must be considered a residential use of property for zoning and public and private utility rate purposes, and adult family homes are a permitted use in all areas zoned for residential or commercial purposes, including areas zoned for single-family dwellings. So there seems to be some confusion or different policies with different purposes that have been adopted over time by the state. Some of them are saying protect the military lands and their operations. Some are saying protect the use of residential dwellings wherever they may be for adult family homes. And so what we've tried to do with what you'll see here in the next slide is in a way to try to marry those two purposes together while minimizing, hopefully, safety concerns. So there is a chapter that talks about various uses in the Lakewood Municipal Code. Here you'll see some edits specifically related to within the zones AC1 and AC2 and the allowance of adult family homes. So under residential uses in red, you'll see that it is now being proposed to be permitted in both AC1 and 2. You'll see down further below that type 1 group home, where in the past adult family homes have been included, are now no longer included there. It's up in the residential uses. These are a couple of other sections of 18A 4130, which are being proposed for amendments. First of all, there would be an exemption to the allowance of, because it's a non-conforming use, you're not able to remodel. This is saying there is an exemption where you are able to do one time a less than 25% of the existing building valuation remodel. Sorry, that was an awkward way to say that. Non-conforming buildings, uses, and structures, down there you'll see below, a one-time addition expansion of no more than 200 square feet of conditioned space shall be permitted. So again, what this is saying is that there would be a one-time allowance Often what happens with adult family homes are conversions of certain spaces or carports or something in a house to become another room. And that's what this is recognizing. The next amendment you have talked about, it's a technical one once more, and this gets back to that idea of what's a center of local importance and whether it can be called that anymore. Under some county planning policies that have changed, we are moving in accordance with that to change the name from center of local importance to center of municipal importance. Really no other difference than that. And one of the maps under the next amendment, this is in particular figure 4.1. The other maps that are being proposed for amendment under this amendment would be some of the past park and open space maps, which are now obsolete given some things that have happened in the last decade in the city. But this is just recognizing various areas of focus of development interest, green streets, open spaces, et cetera. You'll see, for instance, the 3 sub areas now are recognized. You'll see the new interchanges that are recognized down by Tilikum. And you'll see the green street in the downtown in that kind of green rectangle. The final amendment here is 2022-07, and this is this summary page showing you what's been suggested as amendments based on a look at 1880-030, the citywide parking requirements, and then 18C 600-610, the station district specific parking requirements. And this was a conversation that was had with Ms. Brunel last meeting or the meeting prior with the Planning Commission. So that is a summary of all of these. We've talked about them multiple times over the last 6 months or so, but we just wanted to make sure that that was explained on the record this evening, particularly the adult family homes issues, because those had not been included in a discussion with the Planning Commission up to this point. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll step out of the way for the hearing.
Great. So we'll open up the public hearing in regards.
Chair?
Yes.
Before you open up the hearing, I'd like to go back to the adult family home section
Thank
just
you.
one more second. What Tiffany said or described about the 200 square foot addition is correct for adult family homes. But it also refers to the 290 non-conforming single family homes in that district that under our current code, the only way they could make that a kind of expansion would be to get a conditional use permit approved by the hearing examiner. That is an arduous process. And so if we're going to change this for adult family homes, it just seemed reasonable to consider it for a one-time, relatively minor expansion to an existing single family home so they can provide additional square footage, 1 to 200 square feet. All of those properties and structures are under the maximum lot coverage standards. So this was a sort of a twofer. This is one thing for adult family homes, but it's also a part of an opportunity for the city to be gracious to single family homeowners who wish to make minor additions to their structures. So I just wanted to point that out.
Great. We'll proceed. We'll open up the public hearing and comprehensive plan amendments 2022-01 through 2022-07. Anyone wishing online to speak in regards to this and under public hearing, raise your hand. I see Mr. John Ficker. If you state your name and the city you reside at, go right ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is, excuse me, my name is John Ficker, and I am the Executive Director of the Adult Family Home Council. I reside in the city of Lacey, Washington. I spoke before your commission 2 weeks ago, I believe, to share our concerns about the approach with regard to adult family homes. I am here this evening to say thank you for hearing those concerns and recognizing it and taking what we think is a much more appropriate and legal approach to allowing adult family home operators to continue to operate in the air corridor, as well as for those homes that have made significant investments are in the process right now of attempting to be licensed. We believe that, I believe that many of the comments made by staff were right on point about the really who has the right to determine where an adult family home is limited to the state of Washington. That adult family homes should be excluded from a group home category, as state law makes it clear that they are considered the residential use of property. So I thought those were some important things. And again, I just want to thank you and encourage you to move this forward so that the families that have chose to open their home to the vulnerable, to the disabled, to the dying, will be able to continue in their service. And I am more than open to a longer term conversation with the city about any future changes with the air corridor as they seem appropriate. We just want to ensure that, again, that the rights of the current adult family home operators and those folks who are in development of adult family homes are recognized and honored and allowed to continue to do their work. So again, thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions or be available if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ficker. Appreciate it. Anyone else wishing? Alex Hancock on talk on this, or Chris Pfeiffer, Jeff Rudd, Ira Pfeiffer. No other hands are up. Going once.
Mr. Chair, just a reminder that you also did receive written comments by email either yesterday or today regarding, I believe it's, I'm going to lose the number of the amendment, but it's related to
Tilikum.
number
02.
2, the Tilikum application.
Great. Yes, we do have that. Appreciate that. So that is in record under public hearing. Okay, seeing no other hands, anyone wishing in the audience to speak regarding this? All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so seeing no other person willing to speak under this public hearing, we will close the public hearing at this time for the comprehensive plan 2022-01 through 2022-07. Thank you for all those that made comments.
Mr. Chair, just for reference, the letter that we did receive and any other correspondence where there were questions, you have closed the public hearing, but our intention is to bring back and answer those questions before you take action.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on under new business, the tree preservation code update discussion.
And Mr. Chair, Courtney Brunel will be leading this, but there will be others, I believe, joining her as part of the presentation group.
Great, thank you.
Yes, good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Commission. Tonight I am joined by Lisa Bruder from Burke, who you had the opportunity to meet at our last meeting, as well as Alex Hancock and Chris, both from Planet Geo, and they have prepared a great presentation tonight, some of which was shared with the Ad Hoc Tree Committee that will lead into a conversation regarding what the Ad Hoc Committee's recommendations were. So at the end, we will all be available to answer questions, but for now, I'm going to turn it over to Alex and Chris.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to work on sharing my screen right now, making sure that everyone can see the presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so Courtney did a great intro there. Just want to do some introductions quickly. My name is Alex Hancock. I'm an urban forestry climate consultant with Planet Geo. And Chris Pfeiffer is on the line as well. He is my director of urban forestry consulting services. And not on this call, but was a part of this project as well, is Jeremy Cantor. He's the director of our geospatial services. And Lisa is on the line as well. Lisa, do you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. I'm Lisa Greeter with Burke Consulting, and we were working with Planet Geo and city staff on the public engagement side and helping facilitate the committee.
Great, thank you. So we do have a lot of information that we've put into this presentation, but we really want to get to the committee's recommendations for the tree code. So first we'll cover the tree canopy analysis that the committee used to recommend goals in their report. And then we'll move on to the tree code evaluation process and finish with some information about community engagement. Our project started with a staff survey and consultations to gather information from Courtney and other city staff who are most in tune with urban forestry issues facing Lakewood. We can, yes.
Sorry, are you moving your slides?
They should, can you see that now?
Now we can, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We conducted a tree canopy analysis to establish that baseline data that would inform the policy discussion that we had with the ad hoc committee. And through that series of committee meetings, we discussed a range of topics at great length. And as the urban forestry consultants, we provided our expertise and best management practices. We primarily assisted with the research, review, and benchmarking steps. And Lisa and Burt Consulting worked with the city and committee to draft the recommendations that we're presenting to you today. So she'll be sharing more on that throughout the presentation. So to get us started, this quote provides some context on why this urban tree code update process is so important to Lakewood. A healthy, vibrant urban forest isn't created overnight. It's grown over time and only with commitment from the entire community. An urban forest is much more than just heavily forested areas, although you are lucky to have some of those in Lakewood. Trees along streets, in parking lot islands, and in your backyards are all part of this larger system that we refer to as the urban forest. There are several methods for studying the urban forest. An inventory would give species-specific information on trees on public property, but for Lakewood, it was decided that the best approach would be to look at the citywide canopy to better understand the distribution of trees throughout the city on public and private property. So to do this, we conducted a tree canopy assessment that provides you with a citywide tree canopy percentage number that we call UTC for short, in addition to a full assessment of different land covers within Lakewood. So Lakewood's results were delivered citywide and more narrowly within specific boundaries like zoning districts. And we looked at the change in tree canopy cover from 2011 to 2019 as well. And all of this information is provided to the city, the ad hoc committee, and now all of you so that we can make policies and goals that are backed by data. Just generally, tree canopy and land cover data have many possible applications, some of which are shown on the screen here. For Lakewood, the results on the next few slides are going to give you a clear understanding of where the tree canopy is currently distributed throughout the city, the changes over time, and the ability to compare your numbers with other cities in the region during our benchmarking exercises. So the land cover results shown on this slide could be discussed at great length, but the main point that I want you to get out of this slide is that Lakewood has 38% impervious surfaces and 9% water. And those are areas that cannot be considered for future tree planting unless they're converted to green space through a development project or some other process. The tree canopy percentage number that you see here is actually lower than the UTC number we'll see on the next slide. And that's because water is included in land classification, whereas it's an industry standard to omit water from UTC because so many jurisdictions have water, a lot of water within their boundaries that can heavily skew the results. So the 26.5% herbaceous area here is generally viewed as area that could support future tree canopy, but it's worth noting that a future analysis could go more in depth to exclude areas dedicated to sports fields and utility lines where trees are really not likely to be supported in the future. And for our UTC results, Lakewood has 26.3% tree canopy, and the vast majority of that canopy is on private land. From 2011 to 2019, Lakewood actually experienced a net gain of 0.5%, which could be for a variety of reasons, and that can include the fast tree growth rate in your region. But this is where tree protection standards play an important role in preserving existing canopy that has growth potential. So also looking at the existing tree canopy by zoning category revealed that the majority of the tree canopy in Lakewood, 59%, is on single family residential property. So parks, open space, and residential or recreation areas are next with 17%, and then multifamily with almost 6%, and then so on. It is common that in cities, especially those built out like Lakewood, most of the tree canopy is in residential areas where there's less conflicts with development and impervious surfaces. And just to highlight a little bit of our benchmarking, you can see that Lakewood is within the range of some of the surrounding cities that have also assessed their UTC, with Tacoma being at 20% and Auburn at 32%. And this comparison also demonstrates that the results can vary drastically based on land use patterns and population densities. And that brings me to my next slide, that as cities consider setting canopy goals, there is no one size fits all. And we discussed these topics with the Ad Hoc Committee, and we looked at goals for Lakewood. So based on Lakewood's result of 26.3% canopy cover, we outlined scenarios for achieving future canopy of 40% or 35% within 25 years. And before I hand it over to Lisa to discuss the committee's recommendation, I'll say that we recognize that goals should be challenging, but by outlining a stepwise approach like this with benchmarking goals along the way, it encourages an achievable plan and with good direction as well. And so Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about this part?
Sure. So the committee looked at the same information and the potential to have a no net loss of the current canopy, or 35% or 40%, and went with a unanimous or almost unanimous recommendation for 40% goal by 2050. The discussion centered around it being a long-term goal to strive for. And it has been helpful to have this information, I think, to discuss what's happening in different zones and how the city might shape it, not only the code, but other aspects of its tree program. Courtney, looks like.
Yeah, I do just want to add as a general point that right now, the way that our tree preservation code is organized, it's based on individual trees. We don't really do an overall tree canopy. However, as an industry, local government is moving in this direction. So we see more of a call to this from the Association of Washington Cities, just recently published something, MRSC. This is becoming more of the trend where we start to look at overall canopy rather than individual tree stems. So any of the standards that you see spoken about regarding tree canopy would be entirely new and are not currently incorporated in our tree preservation regulations.
Courtney, we do have a question by Mr. Estrada.
Regarding the vote 8-1, what was the issue that one committee member objected to?
I think that was from someone involved in real estate or land development, and I think if I recall the discussion, it was that they wanted to focus on other aspects of the tree code rather than an overall tree canopy goal.
I believe they had originally entertained a motion for 37.5. And then it went up to, so they wanted to split it between 35 and 40. And then it ended up getting a majority vote for 40.
All right, thank you.
Great. Mr. Larson does have a question.
I have a couple of questions. The first is this difference between 28% and 40%. It's 12 acre, or it is 12%. How many acres is that?
Alex, I believe you have that on the slide. Like, what would it take to get to that goal?
Okay, let's see. Okay, yes. So I did kind of zoom through this quickly, but the chart here actually shows the difference. So in order to reach the 40% goal in 25 years, 14% increase would be 1,500 acres of new canopy. And one point that I do want to reference is that existing trees do grow, and that does add acreage and percentage to that number. And so it would be in combination with new plantings for the city.
So does that count on part of the city of Lakewood to grow in acreage in order to find 1,500 acres somewhere in the city of Lakewood and plant trees there?
No, so this is based on the existing land area. And yep, so it would just be expansion of like tree growth from existing trees and then also new additional tree plantings in areas that don't currently have trees.
1,500 acres at a very conservative 4 homes per acre of a place for people in Lakewood to live. That's 6,000 people. Would that be correct in your calculation?
It would also apply to any parking lot. For example, right now we do have standards that islands are required. I think it's in between every 7 or 14 parking stalls. And so one possibility would be changing that number or requiring a certain type of tree that has a larger shade canopy than some of what we see today. Any of those regulations could also be incorporated, but it would not just be for residential property owners. This would be something that could be applied to any of our existing open spaces, any schools, anywhere where there's a potential for tree growth, including those industrial and commercial zones.
Did you look at planting trees in the Mccord Air Force Base AC-1 area that's currently vacant and devoid of vegetation?
That is one
Between
potential area.
112th at Interstate 5, or Interstate 512, or Highway 512, excuse me.
That would be one potential area.
Thank you. Mr. Buer?
Just be careful when you get into the North Clear Zone because there's underlying easements that restrict trees at a certain height. So just an FYI, it's a little more complicated. There's also existing regulations in our non-conforming use section that says if you're proposing to redevelop a major commercial industrial area and you are not in compliance with our current landscaping requirements, you would be required to upgrade them. So there's already code provisions that would address some of this in the event of upgrades, renovations, or adaptive reuse, which we are beginning to see more and more of, which you will hear more about in future meetings.
Ms. Spear, you had.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can Alex or someone explain what the term canopy is referring to? Is that the leafy top of a tree, which is bigger than the trunk? Or can you just clarify that for everybody?
Yes, sure. So canopy is it is the full coverage of the tree over land. So we look at the leafy coverage that is above the ground. So there's separate areas that are designated as shrub, and that would not be included in this. But everything that is designated as a tree would then be included, and it's the entire canopy area that the footprint of the tree if you're looking down from the top.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Larson.
How was the 40% goal established? Who made that decision?
So we laid out options based on a variety of benchmarking exercises. We looked at some surrounding area goals and also just industry standards to see what other cities are doing for canopy goals. And by laying out these scenarios, we wanted to provide the committee with options and different ways to get there. So you can do a 40% canopy goal with 25 years, or you can do it with 30 years or 40 years. And so this was decided on, of the scenarios, this was decided on by the committee.
Alex, doesn't the 40% also tie directly in with the health equity scoring for tree canopy coverage? So I can't recall what that data source is.
So there are, in with the tree equity score, which is a piece that we is available to the public, and you can go online and look at tree equity score. for any community. But yes, there are different standards that you can look at through that. Now, 40%, it was at one time viewed as a standard to attempt to achieve, but then, as we discussed earlier, not every community is set up to support 40%. So it is a number that is commonly looked at by cities. And if it's feasible, then it can be set as a goal.
Hey, Alex, could I add to that real quick?
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah, Chris Pfeiffer here with Planet Geo. I just wanted to add that to develop the 40% goal, we also applied a ground up approach. So we looked at each zoning class and we consolidated the zoning classes to look at achievable planting targets per zoning class, just hypothetical with a variety of scenarios to it. So, you know, residential may have more available planting space compared to industrial commercial. Once we applied those targets, then it came up with an estimated number of trees. And from that, the number of trees grew into a canopy goal overall. We also then applied the tree equity score from American Forests, where that looks to correlate canopy with sociodemographic data. So we're not only looking at increasing benefits of trees, but also tree equity in Lakewood. And this canopy goal would then address the census block groups to bring all census block groups to a score of at least 75 out of 100 for the tree equity score. And so that was part of the calculation for bringing these scenarios to the committee then.
Mr. Parsons.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about what the added benefits represent? I see here when we go with scenario 1 and 40%, it looks like almost a 50% increase in added benefits. Can you talk a little about what that is?
Sure. So those are the ecosystem benefits provided by the trees. And so it's calculations that are developed by the Forest Service through a program called iTree. And those calculations are used throughout the US. And it measures the value of the services provided, like the aesthetic value, the stormwater gallons diverted by the tree, the carbon sequestered and the carbon stored within the tree, energy savings, and a multitude of ecosystem benefits.
Great. Mr. Combs.
I have a couple questions and a follow-up on that one. It would be helpful to see a breakdown of how those different values are. Aesthetic value doesn't actually, you know, like any property value, it doesn't materialize until something transacts. So it's just a feeling, right? But the rest of it does have some measurable to it, carbon footprint and so on. So it'd be helpful, or at least for me, to see something about how that breakdown looks, because I don't know if it's 90% of one or if it's evenly split. And so just a question on that. I apologize, Mr. Buwright. Did I understand you right to say that if this is changed, that existing properties would need to come up to that standard, or are they grandfathered in?
If you have an existing commercial center that was built in 1968, and you're proposing to do a major remodel, including tenant improvements, when you come in for that tenant improvement under our current code, your existing landscaping is non-conforming. So you are required to upgrade your landscaping as a part of your tenant improvement. That's in the current code.
And how does this apply? This would just be an added layer on top of that.
Yes, basically, if you didn't have, for example, trees in your parking lot, now you're going to be required to put
much harder to meet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you all considered that in your planning and recommendations, Ms. Brunel?
Yes, I think the way that this would practically apply is the 40% goal would live in the comprehensive plan. And then for the tree preservation code itself, we would start to look at canopy coverage overall. And we'll get into that a little bit more in some of the next recommendations. But for example, rather than saying that a certain number of trees have to be preserved, we would be looking at a certain percentage of canopy being preserved, and or if a tree is removed, replacing it with a tree certified by an arborist to replace that type of canopy, which compared to how we do things now, for example, one large tree could translate into 30 little trees that have to be scattered around the lot. So rather than requiring 30 little trees be planted, we could say 1 or 2 littler trees that are likely to mature to a larger canopy. So that would be one example. If that's not feasible for a specific site, or a property owner doesn't want any trees on their site, I would say that we'd continue to offer options for off-site replacement. And that maybe is one of the goals of the city, that we locate some sites for off-site replacement, whether that be in parks, open space, partnerships with different schools, variety of options there, or paying into a fund that would do the same thing, which are options that we have today. So for the canopy overall, this larger goal of 40%, again, probably in the comp plan amendment or comp plan, and then the code itself would support that goal. And it maybe is included in the purpose statement. And that could potentially be how we look at canopy for individual lots.
Just going down my list here, because I had a lot. I was going to let you go through the whole thing and then ask, but since we've got the can open, I figure I might as well. Maintaining the trees, I understand we're already having a tough time maintaining the trees we have, not just the city, but residents as well. It's a very expensive thing to maintain a big tree as opposed to a small tree, and requires outside services most of the time to do that. How is that factored in to the proposal? Obviously, the economics of that aren't favorable to those who are economically strapped or on the lower income category. And so that's one thought that comes to mind. 1,500, when I saw that number, I thought that we're shooting for the sky, because I don't know how and where. There's a lot of questions with that. Like, how do you actually do something like that? And in my mind, I love the idea of the trees and regrowth and having replacement. And so I'm trying to figure out, why the 40% is significant for us 25 years down. I mean, we're already on the high end. Just in the Pacific Northwest, 28 to 33 is kind of the average. And we're in the tree area. They don't even have this kind of coverage in Arizona or Texas or anything like that. So if we protect what we have and do a better job and maybe have a moderate one, I guess I'm trying to figure out what the major benefit is here, because 1.2 million over 1,500 acres economically doesn't make any sense. But there obviously is some other outside value besides economics, right? It's the carbon and smaller footprint and the habitat. We all value that. And so it's, in my mind, I'm trying to figure out, are we trying to, cut a tree down with a pocket knife, or are we taking a chainsaw to a thistle? And I want to right size the solution to the problem. And I'm not even sure I understand what the problem is, because the coverage sounds like it's right in line with other places. So what's the problem we are solving by going to a 40% coverage as opposed to where we're at now? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. In this we didn't include this graphic in this presentation, but we will bring it back next time. And it shows the percentage of canopy in the different zoning districts. I don't think that graphic is included in this presentation, Alex.
No, it's not.
When you look at that, you see that based off of socioeconomic areas, there are certain areas that have way fewer trees than more affluent areas. And that started some of the conversation at the Ad Hoc Committee. I will say that the Ad Hoc Committee acknowledged that this was a very lofty goal. It was the highest of the options that were provided to them and presented to them. And they thought that, if you're going to shoot for the stars, you might as well just keep on going. And so they picked the highest option. But for the reason for 40% and the likelihood of 40%, I think that map and that graphic that kind of shows where there's some gaps in tree canopy coverage might help to tell the story as to where we might look at potential replanting. And then there was also a graphic about the amount of the existing canopy and where it is currently found compared to how much would have to be replanted in some of the different zones. So we'll bring that back to you on your first meeting in June.
I'll hold the rest of my questions so you can go through. Thanks.
Yep. Mr. Pearson.
Yeah, I was curious about what is the height of a tree, or what kind of size of tree kind of trips into these thresholds? I mean, is it like a newly planted straight tree that's like, I don't know, 12 feet tall and has like a 3-foot diameter or something? Like, does that even register in the calculations, or, what is, yeah, that was one of my questions. And then, yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as Mr. Combs, is not, and maybe understanding what the real problem was. It seems like we were kind of, right on track with some of these other places, and 40% seems awfully lofty. When I look around typical neighborhoods and stuff, I'm thinking 40% is like quite a bit. And I don't know, sounds like there's a graphic that shows where there could be some target areas to improve that might be, easier or better bang for your buck. But yeah, I would be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, so just to answer the first question, growth that is above shrub level. So, and we don't have Jeremy on the call to answer the question of where that threshold is, but it is for newly planted trees. You do have a lot of growth within those first years, so they do register in this canopy. And let's see, Chris, do you have anything to add on that piece?
Yeah, sure. So when we do the calculations, we're looking at a large percentage of trees that are planted will grow to large statured trees at maturity. And we use the U.S. Forest Service's range of small, medium, and large trees for these calculations. So we're looking at diameter and then coming up with square footage and overall acreage estimates. Like Alex said, we'd have to check with our geospatial director on the threshold for what is considered canopy versus shrub. But going forward, like I said, there's some assumptions made to plant large trees when possible because of the benefits. And I wanted to also just add, and where it's feasible too, you can't always put a large tree. I did want to also add that besides the canopy disparity in some areas of the city with more canopy in affluent areas, there's also a growing trend and concern that canopy is decreasing in cities, and additional analyses would show that the urban forest in Lakewood is vulnerable to climate change, pests, and diseases. And so supporting this should be a strategic plan of what types of trees, when to plant, how, a variety of things, who. And lastly, I just want to mention that this is a shared commitment of the city leading where it can, where it has authority, but also, as Alex showed, there's a lot of space in residential land. So outreach and education should be continued so that folks preserve what they have. They maintain trees well at a young age so they're not costly at maturity, and they're planting trees on their own property to support this overall goal for tree equity and the benefits they provide. So a little long-winded, but just a couple of questions that came up that I thought I might address a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weigeman has a question.
Yes, thank you. I guess as I look at my neighbors when it comes to trees, and for me personally, I love trees. I grew up in the Sacramento Valley and irrigated corn and was out in the hot sun and always was hoping to find a tree to get in the shade, but it didn't happen very often. So we went up in the mountains, and when I came up here to University of Washington, it was like going into the mountains of California. So we had the big fir trees and it was gorgeous, and I loved it. However, as I look at my neighbors now, the trees are a problem. First off, if they're too close to your house, they end up breaking your foundation, which is a problem. Certainly the big firs do. And what do you do about that? How do we, where do we plant them? The other thing with big firs, they shed limbs. My neighbor just had a limb go right through his roof here a couple months ago now. And so that's frustrating. The other thing that trees do, if they're close to your house, is they fill your gutters up. And so that creates some other problems for us. So we got roots, leaves, and those kind of things. And so how do we help our neighbors deal with that issue? And then I guess I come back to the 40%. Why 40%? I mean, is there some data that says that's the right number? I mean, we talked about, climate change and all those things. I mean, can we do some things control that? Everything that I've learned about trees is they help take the carbon dioxide out, right? That's what trees are good at. So that's a good thing for some of the things we're talking about. I guess one other negative about trees, we've talked about getting sustainable energy here in our community. When I had the people come out and look at my house to say, is it worth putting solar panels on my roof? He said, well, you got to get rid of that tree and you got to get rid of that tree and that tree. Right. So if we're gonna go down that road, then how do we mitigate some of those things? So I'm glad we're talking about it because I think it's important. Again, I like the trees things, but I'm also looking at the problems of maintaining our communities. So those are my thoughts.
Great, thank you. Mr. Buer, you had a question?
Not a question, just a comment. We have 44 slides. We're only on 14.
Okay, good. We'll hold some other comments till later. Continue on your presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. Lisa Greeter had her hand up. I'm not
Yep.
sure if she needed to
Okay.
share something else.
Lisa, did you have a?
Just a quick follow-up. I think what we showed in terms of other tree canopy examples, percentages, are the current canopy percentages, but some of those cities do have goals. So we could bring back to your next meeting, not just what they are today, but what some other cities have for goals.
Great, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Okay. And I believe, just getting back to the slides here. Okay, so just wanted to highlight that these are some of the resources we utilize while working with the City of Lakewood on tree code evaluation. So all of the best management practices and industry standards come from a wide variety of institutions that cities all over the US are using these standards. So we have the International Society of Arboriculture, Sustainable Forestry Institute, Vibrant Cities Lab. These are all important national bases of knowledge that we use while also tapping into the local knowledge and community input. So first, we want to dive into the discussion of exemptions in Lakewood's tree code. So 3 of the exemptions in the code are based on the tree's location, and that would be the first one is single family residential lots under 17,000 square feet. And the second is industrially zoned properties. The third is easements and right-of-ways. And then the remaining 2 exemptions are based on the characteristics of the tree or the conditions of the tree. And so that includes emergency removal and trees not designated as significant. And we'll be going into more detail on these on the next slides. So, and this may be helpful as part of the discussion that we just had. So currently, like we said, there is a single family residential lot exemption for lots under 17,000 square feet. And the map on the right it shows you all single family residential lots. And if you remember that the tree canopy assessment showed that 59% of the city's tree canopy cover is on single family residential land. And you can see those numbers broken down in the bottom left for the R1 to R4 zoning districts. And you can see that majority of the tree canopy is on R3 lands, and R1 and R4 have less than 10% each, and then R2 is right at 10%. So as we go on to this slide, this map on the right shows only single family residential lots under 17,000 square feet. So these are the lots that are exempt from tree protection standards as the code is today. And these make up 82% of the single family residential lots. And when you look at the total land area of the lots, that's 58% of the land area here. So it's still a majority of the single family residential land. And then this is a scenario that we laid out so that we could just hypothetically look at lots. If we were to reduce that exemption to 10,000 square feet, how much of a difference is that there? If it were reduced, this would reflect as 42% of the single family lots and 23% of the single family land area. So this scenario is helpful, but the question we posed to the committee is, what is the intent behind the exemption, and what are your recommended changes, if any, and which ones are appropriate for Lakewood specifically? So Lisa, you want to talk a little bit about the committee?
Yeah, the committee looked at 4 options. One was to retain that 17,000 square foot exemption level. Another was the 10,000 square foot level that Alex presented. They also looked at just removing the lot size based exemption. And what they came up with in the end was not just removing the lot size exemption, but also ensuring there were incentives to make it easier to retain trees. And in their detailed report, issue number 12, that's where they list out a long list of incentives in that. So they wanted to make sure it was both incentive oriented as well as a way to track the tree canopy. And you'll see later some of their recommendations were to have a simple permit process for this, because they want to make it simple and fair. But it was a way, the city right now doesn't have a way to track trees that are removed with exemptions.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'll keep going through these and then I'm happy to answer questions. So for the next exemption, all industrially zoned properties are exempt from the tree preservation standards. And just it's worth noting that industrial properties contain 3.2% of Lakewood's tree canopy. And again, the question that we posed to the committee is, what is the intent and what changes, if any, for Lakewood? And Lisa.
Sure. I think the committee looked at retaining the current exemption and only looking at it through the State Environmental Policy Act, or removing the exemption, or the same kind of balancing act as we just discussed for residential, to have both removal of that exemption, so it would be reviewed under the tree preservation code, but also with incentives to make it easier to retain the trees. And I think the committee was interested in having balance between residential, commercial, and industrial property owners.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next exemptions that I wanted to discuss are the easements and right-of-way and the emergency removal. And I will say that both of these, we do see these in many codes. So it is something that, especially with the easements and right-of-way, when the city or the utility needs access to the trees in order to maintain the utilities, that is a standard need within a city, that those public infrastructure is that they're maintained. And so the issue that may come up is that there's no tracking then for how many trees are removed when trees are removed, but it is standard that there is some level of allowance for a public agency or utility there. And then emergency removal of trees when they are hazardous, and typically that includes emergency situations if there's a storm, if there is a threat to or danger to life or dwellings and property. So this is something that is frequently outlined in a code. Sometimes there are processes that a tree removal company or a homeowner or a business owner would still have to go through a permitting process, maybe an after the fact or a notification to the city. And that is common as well. So, and Lisa?
Yeah, so they looked at a couple of options. One was to keep the current exemption, but do some cleanup of definitions of what trimming and pruning is. And then they went a little further in the one that they ultimately recommended here at the bottom, so that they would remove the exemption, treat tree retention or protection standards similar between public and private, but have a simple permit recognizing what Alex was describing. They need to be able to maintain infrastructure. There would be some updates to the definitions of trimming and pruning. There was some discussion about Gary Oaks and ensuring appropriate standards. We can talk a little bit about some of the research on those codes later for Gary Oaks. They want some kind of, and I think this is to help the city with the review process, Arborist certification for ensuring that the appropriate expertise is addressed. So that they unanimously went with this recommendation.
Thanks, Lisa. Sorry, I was on mute there. So this exemption is for trees not designated as significant. And this has to do with how we define a protected tree. And many codes make those definitions, those keywords, they look at them differently. But in the case of Lakewood's code, a significant tree is one that is 9 inches DBH for evergreen and deciduous trees, 6-inch DBH, and I'm sorry, DBH is diameter, breast height. It's the standard measurement for trees. And so 6-inch DBH for Gary Oaks. And regardless of the tree diameter, the director has the ability to have ultimate say in that. So, so these are the options that, or this is the code as it stands for Lakewood. And the way that this is laid out, where there's very specific standards as far as dimensionally, that is common in codes. So the questions for the committee were, are these sizes appropriate? Do you want to get more specific with species that you're outlining here? Some cities have very specific lists of which trees they protect, which ones may be exempt because they're invasive, things like that. So there were many options that we talked through with the committee, and I'll hand it over to Lisa to talk about more of the committee discussion.
So the focus of the committee was on Gary Oaks. The current standard for evergreen trees was not in question. We looked at the heights that Gary Oaks are shown in significant tree ordinances, as well as the regulations and critical area regulations, because they are regulated, especially when they're in a savanna as a critical area, but they're also recommended to be regulated when they are of significant size, particular sizes. So I don't know, Alex, the slide hasn't advanced for me, but maybe you could go one more and we can show that. There we go. Thank you.
Sure.
So the Gary Oaks, the minimum standard to be considered a significant tree was reduced from 6 inches to 4 inches. And that had to do with a discussion with the committee on that they're a very slow growing tree. And the State Department of Fish and Wildlife representative was there and helped provide some background, but it would be one of the lowest thresholds in the state, recognizing its value and that it's diminishing and it's considered an important tree. And then it would include increasing the replacement ratio and addressing what that means in terms of the in lieu fee payment. And that the city could create an offsite replacement strategy. And then to set a heritage tree, that would be a tree that gets extra protection or extra review. That's at that 15-inch level, and then 20 inches or more, or white oak stands, would qualify as a fish and wildlife habitat conservation area. That was after looking at the state's management recommendations and the Pierce County Code. We also looked at the Oak Harbor Code and implementation. So this was the recommendation of the committee with a unanimous vote.
Thank you, Lisa. And just want to also clarify, there are, it is common for different codes to have different size protection standards for like significant, even more significant trees, like a species that needs to have an additional layer of protection. So that is not uncommon. And yeah, so we'll just move along here.
So in terms of the heritage tree idea, several cities have either additional protections in their code or incentives or recognition of trees that are important culturally or environmentally. And so we shared information on those examples, Puyallup, Lacey, Tumwater, and Poulsbo. And so the options before the committee were to establish such a program or retain the current code without such a program. And so they voted in favor of having a heritage tree or historical tree program. And it would be up to the city to determine what that looks like. They didn't get into the specifics, but I think there was a lot of discussion about various examples around Lakewood and the value they have for the community.
Thanks, Lisa. And now this is moving on to the tree permit process.
So I think with the idea that some of the exemptions were modified, which means they would need some kind of review, the committee looked at the city's current procedures and spent time thinking about what their recommendations might be like. Some were talking about recommending a specific permit fee per tree. Some were talking about equity and having a sliding scale and making sure that people complied, or that the city made it easy to comply. And in the end, after looking at several options, they came up with overall advice that the Planning Commission and Council can spend more time on, which is keep permits fair, inexpensive, and simple. But recognizing with Gary Oaks that require additional review and monitoring by an arborist, that might be a varied fee for that.
And I think we'll go ahead and move to the next one. This goes back to the single family residential discussion. So. Right, and I think the committee was looking at several options, including some research that Alex and others provided that looked at allowing for a certain number of trees to be removed per year or over a 5-year period, versus some other options where the percentage of canopy on a lot is looked at. And so that was ultimately the recommendation that they pursued. So cities that would have that kind of regulation on focusing more on the percentage of canopy, they do allow for removal of trees for the footprint of new homes and things like that, as while balancing with locations where tree canopy is
either protected or added to meet that percentage. That percentage has not been set in the recommendations. That is something that we would bring forward to the Planning Commission. It would not necessarily be the 40% we were talking about, as Courtney mentioned. That's a citywide goal. This is more at the scale of properties.
Great, thank you. And I think one of the examples of a city who's doing this already is Tacoma, that they have these calculations in their code. But there are some cities in the surrounding area that have tree canopy calculations for per property.
Yeah, I think another example is Olympia.
Okay.
The code right now sets some replacement guidance if trees need to be removed and need to be replaced. And so I'll just give an overview, and Alex, you can add more, but this was another one where we presented a couple different options. One would be based on tree counts, and another would be based on the size of the tree and the percentage. And so that's what ultimately they went with to help make that workable from a permit review standpoint. There would be a certified arborist report that helps determine what the no net loss condition is and what the mitigation is to achieve the necessary replacement ratio. So Alex, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that.
Sure, yeah. Well, just to say that this is the right tree, right place is really what the issue that was brought up before about, trees impacting foundations and really the negative impacts of the trees. A lot of that can be solved through right tree, right place practices. And when we do have the opportunity to have those mitigation plantings on site, there's so much more that the benefits can bring to the property with new trees if trees do need to be removed, so that you put them in the right place, you get the right benefits for that property. So no net loss is a standard minimum that a lot of cities really have taken on at a very basic level, just to ensure that no canopy and it's exactly what Lisa was saying, that you can either go by the percentage of canopy or you can go by the number of trees, and just ensuring that you have no net loss. And so that is a standard in many cities as well.
So currently the city has a tree fund, and that if there's fees collected, such as through penalties or donations and grants, they would go into the fund. And there's a variety of things the city could do with the fund in terms of planting or preservation or education. And there's a number of other cities that have a similar fund. So the Ad Hoc Committee was supportive of using the tree permit fees as well as penalties to go into the fund, and that there be an explicit funding purpose to include restoration or enhancement of native trees like the Gary oaks, such as on public lands, private tree tracts, critical area buffers, or lands with conservation easements.
Yes, and it is common for cities to have to direct these funds in a way that is and for environmental preservation or conservation efforts. So expanding upon what the city has, if there were to be additional permit fees or other fines attached to bad tree practices, then it would make sense to have to further clarify what those tree funds are being used for.
In terms of fines, the committee looked at, well, some of the background was that stated there on the slide is that sometimes the city will establish a fee or fine and then it gets reduced through the court reviews. And recognizing the city wanted to improve compliance. The committee looked at a few things. One was to have free or low-cost tree permit or affidavit over-the-counter review to make compliance the easy path. Providing some clear decision criteria on tree permits for either approval or denial. And then in terms of fines, increasing the penalties for non-compliance. They looked at some example cities that do have up to triple penalties. The committee discussed that it should apply to the property owner and the contractor. That was something they added to the options, and then having an administrative appeal opportunity that has a code-based percentage limit. That's something that Lacey does. So they'll have someone appeal to the hearing examiner, but their code says you can only reduce this fee by up to 30%, so that at least almost 2/3 of the fee remains.
And just want to add that a lot of times permits and fees and things when we're talking about all of this. So the question it was discussed with the committee, why would we have a permit if we're not charging any money for it? And the real idea behind that is that you want to have interaction. The city would want to have interaction with the property owner, business owner on the front end of tree removal, so that everyone can make sure that they're on the same page of what's allowed to be removed, what's the plan after removal, and then the city would have some idea of how many trees are being removed. Because when we have these goals, we're looking bigger picture of how are we going to even have no net loss or grow our canopy. How do we know what we're actually, what our regulations are turning into? How do we know what the impact is? So having permits at a no cost fee does make sense just for the case of having that interaction at the front end. And so as part of our committee meetings, we looked at incentives within the code, because there is a great opportunity to be innovative and to look at solutions that can work with the new development or infill development as it's happening. So one of the incentives that we looked at is a variance for Gary Oak preservation. And that can look like a setback variance, a parking variance, and a landscape variance. This was the example that we looked at from Oak Harbor. And this is, I've seen this in codes before. It's common to allow for a setback variance in order to preserve a tree. I've seen it where it just applies to all tree preservation, not even just a specific species like this. And then the other options were to have a parking requirement variance and a landscaping credit of 1.5 square feet for a landscaping requirement, which may or may not make sense for Lakewood. But the other example of an incentive that we looked at was from Portland, Oregon, and they have an FAR bonus, a floor area ratio bonus, that can be transferred from a site when both trees are preserved and when affordable housing is being developed. So when affordable housing is being developed on another property, then you can transfer those credits. So when the tree, of course, would have to be in good health and not dead, dying, or dangerous, not a nuisance tree, and at least 12 inches in DBH. So there are some requirements around the condition of the tree that's being preserved, knowing that it would be growing into a healthy, mature tree. So situations like this are really great to look at when we know that Lakewood is having both development and tree preservation conversations at the same time. And another set of incentives that we looked at were stormwater based. And these are common where you have stormwater runoff reduction based on how many trees you have on a property. And so this gets into those ecosystem benefits provided by a tree. It's fairly easy to make those calculations now that we have a standard methodology for that. So when we have a reduction in impervious surface, that automatically means there's less stormwater runoff and therefore more space for trees as well. So these types of credits exist in many cities. And we looked at Washington, D.C. as one of the examples where they are also looking at increasing their tree canopy numbers citywide. So, and we'll just go ahead to the next one. Then there's also tree or development credits for tree preservation. So a little bit similar to what we've been talking about on the last couple of slides, where you get credits for preserving existing trees, and you would get development towards, or I'm sorry, credits towards development such as reduction in your parking requirements, or also like a floor area ratio, things like that. And we brought some of these options to the committee, and I think some of the committee members actually did some research on their own as well.
Well, we did provide some code citations within the Lakewood Municipal Code where potentially some of these kinds of incentives could apply, like where you could have variable setbacks or height or bonus density and so on. And the committee did add some, as Alex mentioned. So we had the first 6 there, we provided to them as options, and they went with all of those 6. So variable standards, bonus density, bonus height, municipal stormwater credit, having a discount on the land use permit fee for preserving trees, having a Tree City USA program. And then they added an incentive for planting more large canopy trees and utilizing native trees. And then they didn't want to limit what the city considered for incentives. They wanted, this list plus whatever else the city wanted to pursue. So other incentives that reflect best practices. So they definitely were very interested in these, and that's why they also made recommendations earlier on the exemptions to balance changes to those exemption levels with ensuring it was easy to comply and fruitful.
Go ahead, Ms. Courtney, you got a comment?
Yep. So before we move forward, I just wanted to say that these are the recommendations by the Ad Hoc Committee. And if you recall at the last meeting, we discussed that the Ad Hoc Committee was assembled in January. 13 individuals were appointed by the City Council. 12 ended up permanent on the committee, 1 did resign, and we had various levels of participation from all of the members. The next couple of slides is involving community engagement. We have reached out to other stakeholders in order to get their perspective as well. But the next step is for us to take some of these key issues and translate them into what a revised code would look like. And by the time this gets to the City Council, we will likely have 3 versions. We'll likely have the Ad Hoc Committee version, the Planning Commission version, and a city staff version for them to consider. And so we're eager and excited to hear feedback from all of you on these 12 key issues. And as we look to build this revised code, which we hope to present at your next Planning Commission meeting, we do expect the potential for changes. Again, this was the recommendations prepared by that committee.
Okay, continue on.
So as Courtney mentioned, there was some engagement with other folks. There was a survey that we'll review that was advertised more widely to a list that the city had kept of other agencies and individuals interested in trees, as well as posted on social media and other places. We did get 108 responses over about a 4-week period. We had a virtual session called a Tree Talk in April, and we had 9 people participate there. We also asked stakeholders who were maybe not represented on the committee if they would be interested in a one-on-one interview. And so we did interview 6 folks there. And we do have some other activities planned, a tree tour and another tree talk ahead of your, what will likely be your hearing date, so over the June period time. So the next slide just give a few highlights. So in the survey, we asked the top 3 interests that people had in different values that trees provide. So the values were on the right-hand side there, and the results are on the left. So basically the first 3, the habitat value, water quality, air filtration, were the top 3. Another one that received some notice was making tree protection rules clear, effective, and fair. And then they were able to provide open-ended responses. And so the kinds of things that came up during that were concerns about the impact of commercial and residential development on existing tree canopy, concerns about enforcement and mitigation of tree removal, insufficient protection and loss of Gary Oak as a city resource. And there was some concern also about existing trees providing hazards, I think for some of the reasons that the planning commissioners mentioned, as well as sidewalks and other things. And then, how to recover and add to or respond to the loss of tree canopy. The Tree Talk in April was a session where we described the purpose of the tree code review, and we did a little bit of polling on those similar kinds of questions as the survey, and had a dialogue. And so the bullets here just share what folks were concerned about. Some were interested in a tree inventory as well as a permit process. A tree inventory, as was mentioned at the top of the presentation, would be a pretty detailed and significant effort. That would be something the city would need to decide to invest in. And it could be phased. There was a desire to identify heritage trees. You saw that in the Ad Hoc Committee recommendations. A concern that utilities be held to the same standards of tree protection. You also saw that in the Ad Hoc Committee recommendations. Tree cutting and the effect on neighbors, and dissatisfaction with retroactive permitting. And so you saw some of the Ad Hoc Committee recommendations on having a clear permit process and path, as well as changing fines. A clear path to denial. That's also part of the Ad Hoc Committee recommendations, is having clear criteria for either approval or denial. So I think there was a concern about the time, the length of time on this process versus the current code continuing on. And because some information was shared with the Ad Hoc Committee about the city's growth targets and the goals that the city needs to balance under the Growth Management Act and other things, there was a comment on it doesn't need to be trees versus jobs. So that was a summary of those folks' input. And then on the one-on-one interviews, we talked with people from the agencies on the left-hand side, the Asia Pacific Cultural Center, the Rainbow Center, Habitat for Humanity, Lakeview Light and Power, and then a couple of departments in Lakewood that have responsibility for maintaining trees. And so their comments had to do with what they find when they have to maintain trees in the right of way, maintenance practices. They also had some comments about right tree, right place, because they were saying things like that new power lines are being undergrounded, and it's important even in those areas to make sure there's the right tree. There was a support for incentives, support for ensuring equitable approaches to the regulations and tree canopy goals, ideas on how to educate the community about the benefits of trees, and some ideas for where the city, if it allows for offsite restoration, where are some locations for adding or restoring tree canopy.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was, I give, kudos to the Ad Hoc Committee to go through this, but I see a lot of fill-ins that have to be taken into consideration. So any comments from fellow commissioners?
Me first?
Mr. Combs?
Sure. A few questions. One of them directed to Mr. Buer. Utility standards. How practical or doable is that if we hold them to the same standards as proposed here? And I only ask that from a logistics, because if it's a doable, yeah. But if not, I'm kind of curious because it seems like there would be a bit of.
Well, we have a number of challenges there. I've been here for a while, and I can recall on one situation on one street in Lakewood, we talked about the fact that if they were to move forward, it was PSC for installing some new lines, they would have to pay for tree replacement with the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in that particular case, they chose not to do that, but they went ahead and realigned their entire power line process in order not to go through that street. So that was an expensive project for them, and it extended all the way from Tilikum Boulevard through Lakeview, 112th, down Gravy Lake, down Veterans, in order to not remove trees on Interlochen. So that's one example. There are underlying agreements that the city has with all of the utilities where they have certain permitting requirements for moving forward because they are always involved in rights of way issue. That's part of their franchise agreement. So I don't think that this code is going to be in a position where it undermines those franchise agreements without us having to go back and amend the franchise agreements. And if we're amending franchise agreements for permitting because of trees, I think that becomes a bit of a challenge. The Lakewood Water District has very specific requirements for the placement of trees in parking lots and along the rights of way to make sure the trees do not impact major lines. So that is required for all new development. So when we do new development, we try to work with the applicant to make sure that we go around their facilities yet meeting our requirements. I think that some of what is proposed here is problematic, and we're going to have to spend some time going through it and making sure that what's brought forward to the commission and council is workable. So that's just one area. I do appreciate the fact that a lot of work was put into this to move it forward. But on some of the aspects of permitting, I have some concerns about how that's going to work. Also, too, there are certain fiscal impacts that go with these recommendations that we need to spend some time on. And we get into the climate change discussion here in a few minutes, you'll see what I'm talking about.
That's very helpful. And I should have said thank you to all of you, Alex, Lisa, Chris, and Courtney, for such a stellar job. I have watched your meetings, and you guys have done a lot of work. And so my hat's off to you. I know it's hard to put together something that is not easily defined and create some sense out of it and put together goals. But I think one thing you'll find that everybody here is very interested in, common sense and everyone here likes trees. We're in Lakewood, right? We love this area. We love the Northwest. That's why we're still here. So I think that there is a real motivation to come up with something that makes a lot of sense for the city. And what that looks like is, I think, still to be determined. But hats off to you guys, and thank you very much. I don't know, and I can take these questions. Maybe they line up with others. So I will ask my questions, and then maybe I'll turn it over to other people so that it doesn't, if there's any overlap, you might be able to cross two off with one. I don't know how you define a heritage tree. That seems like it could be maybe a little bit of a sticky wicket, depending on what that looks like and whose yard it's in and where it's at. And so talking through what that looks like, the intent versus the impact. I think sometimes we have, in this case, we talked about the permits. I mean, just all the other information, the more information we have and you guys have, from hearing this, you may say, oh, that's something we hadn't considered, or maybe that's something we need to think through as well to come to something that's workable. But I think there are some, when I asked about the canopy coverage, the big things that I heard were the disparities in coverage in areas. So immediately my head goes to how do we improve those areas versus, the overall, planting them in the area that's already super dense doesn't really help that area as much as it would if it was right in that neighborhood, right? And so maybe adjusting to something like that. And then the other one was, due to climate change, it may be decreasing in growth and while that may be possible, it's certainly not true in my yard. I can't keep them out of my yard. They're growing faster than I can get rid of them. And I've got tons of coverage in my yard. And my house is one that's been pelted with branches, and I have a setback all around it. And so Mr. Wagaman's comments really make a lot of sense to me. I'm trying to figure out how you do it, not to do it, but how you actually pull it off with the reality of these trees getting big and the impact they have on gutters, houses, foundations, all of those things. Do we have a city forester? And maybe we do already, but the cost implications that go with that, the permitting, there may be no fee for it, but the cost implications for managing that and how you do that, there's a lot of logistics there to figure out. Again, I'm not trying to throw a wet blanket on the party, more of just like questions that come up as I'm going through this. The fees, I have mixed feelings on fees. I think they're applicable and they're important to get to hold people accountable, but to design a program or create a program that is going to be funded based off of fees is chasing bad money. And so it's like, you have someone not paying their rent, adding late fees onto late fees is chasing bad money. Someone who files for bankruptcy and trying to get them to pay a bill is chasing bad money. And creating something that is a fee, but trying to survive off it is almost like collecting speeding tickets to pay for the roads. There's a little bit of conflict there, and they're not what you want to do. And it's certainly, we don't want to have a bunch more busy work. So coming up with a practical approach to that, and I'm not saying that you guys haven't thought through that, but that's something to maybe speak to. I work up north and down here, and we look at sustainable development. And you know what we use for sustainable development? Trees. And that's the newest thing. That's what everyone has been pushing all throughout the region and the country and the world, Canada, US, all over the place. Whether it's CLT, VLT, it's everywhere. And so we consider, or the world has considered, trees a renewable resource. And this kind of goes in conflict with that approach that we can renew them. I liked what Courtney was saying about replanting and having those standards, because to me, you have to renew it in some way, and trees don't last forever. There is a life expectancy on trees, although some of them do grow and get pretty old, but we have a lot in our area that shouldn't grow as long. So that's something I'm trying to get my arms around, the sustainable growth compared with what we have here. The reasonableness of a no net loss, but also getting a certified arborist. I guess I look at those things and just think, is that reasonable to expect people to do something like that if something's not a lot of questions on it. And again, not hating on it. I really like the preservation of trees. And so I'm trying to figure out how to say it without it coming across the wrong way. But the Gary Oak, I do have a couple questions about it, and you don't have to answer them right now, but maybe later. Why did the Gary Oak #1 focus? And I get that it does have some habitat to it and it has some carbon footprint, but can that be accomplished with other trees? And can we regrow those? Can those be planted? My understanding is you can regrow those pretty well in the Pacific Northwest. And so can we just replant more so we can get ahead of it now? You know, they say the best time to have planted a fruit tree was 30 years ago. And so, you know, if we just focus on that, are we investing in that 30-year plan now with just making some small plantings here and there? So just some food for thought. And then I worry about the permit exceptions on the simple and fair fact. I just wonder if people are going to be discouraged from growing trees if they feel like they're never going to be able to chop them down or relocate them or do anything. And we want them to grow trees. So I think the first, the goal of 40% was almost too much to get my mind around. And so I would think, what is like I've said in this meeting before, what's the low hanging fruit? What are some of the easy things we can do to accomplish a lot now? And then looking long-term, if we see that success and that growth and it's working, can we, from that point, start expanding that goal a little bit further? And I will turn the time back over to the chair.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Combs, who else? Mr. Wegeman.
I'll pile on Mr. Coombs. He hit a couple of things I wanted to bring up. You know, how long does a tree live? You know, I mean, it's certainly not forever. And I look on Washington Boulevard there, but the old cemetery down there, there's a big oak there with a big limb that was probably 16 inches. It was about that big around, broke off when the bad weather came. So that brings up the next question. Do we have a plan to be good stewards of these resources as far as trees? If you ran an orchard or something like that, they do regular pruning, they do certain kinds of fertilizer, they check for disease, all those kinds of things. So I think those are some things that we should do in our communities. Another thing for residential areas, when you get a big fir that grows up and all of a sudden it blocks your view. So one of the things that's happened in the past, certainly in my neighborhood, people go out there and top them, which is the absolute worst thing you can do to a tree. Are there some other options? Can you cut windows in? In other words, if we limit at certain places where your eye view, and then you only have the main trunk that would be blocking your view. One of the things that people certainly here in Lakewood enjoy is if you have the option of seeing Mount Rainier, it's nice to be able to see it and not to look at a tree. So, how do we go through that? So I think it would be nice to have the arborist or whoever the expert on trees is be a available resource as people are landscaping their yards, as they're thinking about those things, so that they can have that conversation, so that they can plan for the common good here.
Mr. Larson.
Along the same line of trees not living forever, they're stated an irreplaceable tree. I don't think there's such thing. And because trees die and we plant new ones and go on, I have to be accounted among those people who love trees. We planted in our yard this last year, probably 12 or so. We have a new orchard. We didn't plant any Gary oaks. We didn't plant any fir trees. And those are a good bit of what makes up Lakewood. We have a little community in Oak Brook called Oak Brook, and it's named for a reason, right? And yet when Oak Brook was built, it was largely denuded of trees, and now 40 and 50 years later, we see a wonderful forest in Oak Brook. And so we get these things over time as we get the opportunity to landscape our properties. And so I wanted to just say that the appearance of the report in general appears to me quite unbalanced. It doesn't incorporate, to my observation, a function of jobs. And among other things, they wanted to take away the exemption of industrial properties, which create jobs in our community for people to have a basis for employment in commercial areas too. So I think that component needs some additional work. It also looks to me like the number of mentions of certified arborists in the report makes it look like a certified arborist full employment act. And I don't think that the function requires a person who's an out-and-out tree expert, because generally speaking, trees are pretty easy to plant and grow. And I don't think we need to go to the degree of imposing certified arborist requirements on the community, as such can be expensive. It was stated that there's an impact on development on the existing tree canopy. Well, what about the opposite? What about the existing tree canopy or the proposed tree canopy in this report? What effect does it have on jobs and its impact on the community? Because we need to have a balance of that, in my view. Because for non-compliance for a long time, it could really affect the jobs in our community, and it needs to, like I said, be balanced and redundant there. Other remarks I agree with. So I agree with Mr. Buer that this needs work, and in my opinion, needs a lot of work. But it's going in a positive direction, and I know its intent is positive by all the people that put it together. Thank you.
Great. Yes, Mr. Parsons.
Yeah, so again, thanks. I think we said it before. Thanks for all the work that you've done on this. Oh,
Can't hear you. Just get it closer to your mouth.
So thank you for all the work you've done on this. It was a good presentation to go through all of it. Obviously, a lot of questions to come on here. I do think, just based on hearing what the members have said, we probably would need to understand the difference on the trees and why the importance, because right now it sounds like we don't understand that piece or see what that significance is. I do want to say I love the incentive portion of this. So actually giving an incentive for people to keep trees, I think is a great thing. And I think that could be something we really focus on to push forward. So out of my takeaway on that, that was one of the big things. I think there's a lot of logistics to go through. And then, as was said earlier, kind of common sense in how we actually make this happen. But really focusing on those incentives, I think we can get through that and encourage people to keep some of these trees for an advantage. Thank you.
Great. I see no other questions. Again, we appreciate all of your diligent work, and we look forward to some additional information coming our way to work through this. So no other closing comments? I hear none. So thank you again to all. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Oh, I skipped over unfinished business, didn't I, Mr. Bueller? How do you top this one?
I can.
Figured.
We've been going for 2 hours. Yeah. Is this something you want to take on, or I can just do a very brief overview and bring it back for further discussion in the upcoming meeting?
I would think.
It's up to you.
Brief. Yeah, brief.
Okay. We're going to bring something up, and I'm going to go through it and give you an overview of how this works.
Okay.
And Tiffany, you can time me more than 10 minutes. You can cut me off.
Go ahead. It'll take me just a
Okay.
second if you want to start.
I basically have taken your primary implementation measures and placed them on one gigantic Excel spreadsheet. It's all there. And it's kind of an interesting approach because it has a notes section. And if we can go to number 1, develop a 5-year,
Sorry, just a second. I have to share it on screen. There we go. Okay.
you go to number 1, develop a 5-year plan.
Sorry.
Okay.
Give me a minute. There we go. Okay.
Okay. And there's a note that goes there. If you can click on that,
Here?
no, just on right there. Okay. Go back.
Sorry.
Okay. The implementation measure is listed. Then what you have are the action steps to accomplish that implementation measure. Then below that, you have a series of web links for additional information should you choose to want to look it up. Now, just so that you know, as we work on these, the action steps and the web links can change. Because what I'm finding out is that when we're talking about climate change right now, there's a lot of things in motion at the moment. And so there's a need for some flexibility, but this gives you an idea of what needs to be accomplished in order to move forward with the implementation measure. So we can go on to category number 1. And so I put, this is new. It's called energy and built environment. So you're going to find out that most of what we're proposing is in that category. There's also outreach, there's education, and long-term. A new piece is partners. So if we're going to be working on implementation and developing a 5-year plan, there's specific partners that we need to be talking to. And in this particular case, it's the utility companies. So those have been listed. Then we get into difficulty and effort. Okay. We have 3 categories, high, medium, and low. If it's high, you get 3 points, medium, 2, and low, 0. In this particular case, I placed it as a difficulty or effort in 3. A priority is critical, important, normal, or low. Here in this case, it's high, so it gets 4. So then I add it all up. So it comes out a 7. Then you get into financials, and this is based upon the 2022 budget, not 2023, because this is where things get a little crazy. If we go in, we have in budget, not in budget, and consulting services. If you go to in budget, okay, this is an estimate of what we are paying out to deal with climate change in 2022. It includes my time at 10%, Courtney Brunel's time at 30%, because I'll tell you, the tree preservation code has sucked up the operations of current planning and myself. Okay, this has been a major effort, and so I'm trying to let you all know what this means as far as cost.
Wow.
Then we have an interim climate change officer coming on board in June. It's actually an associate planner. Half that person's time will be spent on current planning. The other half that time will be spent on climate change. We also have a non-motorized transportation plan at $75,000, a Clover Creek study at $271, document management to reduce paper flow, $300,000, City Hall reallocation of space and energy savings, right now $130,000. And then we have to pay out a little bit to ICLEA in the form of about $2,000 to use some of their software. So your total for 2022 is estimated at just under $1 million. So it just gives you an idea of how this works.
For line 1.
For line
1.
Well, yeah. So
The
we go
5-year
over,
plan.
we drop down, and then we see consulting services, no points. The $36,000, that's because we're going to need some help determining carbon sequestration in forested areas. Total points. So the more points you have, the higher the priority. So it has 11. And then we get into timing. And there's an important aspect of timing. Where budget constraints were identified, completion dates have been extended out. So time frame, early action, progress, we've started. Its frequency is unique. Start date is October 22, and completion date for the first report would be April 23. And then some notes. First reports will be basic. Contents of reports will expand over time. Costs for measuring Lakewood's carbon sequestration difficult to determine. Currently have greenhouse gas for 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. And we've been using Google's EIS system. So we were at around 200,000. With the issues with the pandemic, we went down to 145,000. Then after the pandemic in 2021, we went with still in place. We went up to 175, and we're looking at 200 again. So we went like this in the last 4 years. So we are doing some level of measurement, but not to the extent that we need to. So that's how that one works. If we could go back to the very far side and go down, and let's take a look at urban forest plan. Keep going, non-motorized. Let's go to my right on this and look for the big cost of $300,000. Oh, there we have. Okay. Develop an urban forest management plan, public properties only. These are the action steps. Okay, and there are web links below that. Then we go over to the next one, internal, and then here are all of our partners. And then we start assigning timeframes, and you'll notice that it gets a 2. And the reason it gets a 2 is look at the price tag, $750,000, $300,000 to probably do the study, and then $500,000 annually to actually do a program of urban forestry management. And I checked that number against 2 different sources, and that's what it came to. So that's an expensive item. And then we go a little bit further, you know, not started, unique, unknown, unknown, and then we list possible funding sources and so forth, and then justify the cost so that you begin to see what this looks like. And so as you go through this, you begin to refine which are the ones that are most significant. One that's up there, some of these are easy. If we go down a little bit, number 31, I put new, map vulnerable community assets in disadvantaged neighborhoods. That was one of the 79 or 89 that we started with, and we said, no, that's too difficult to do. We'll do it later. Well, in this particular one, Department of Health actually did it for us. So it's done. So that's one that we can say that we identified, but somebody else did it on our behalf. So if you go through this whole thing, we can spend some time on this a little bit later. But this is how it works. And there's all kinds of little interesting pieces of information. One of the big things going on is EV stations. It's moving so quickly that I cannot keep up with it. That's talked about in this, where the current building code requires you to provide for a EV parking space. Well, what does that really mean? That means 5% must be set aside for EV parking spaces. That means you have to have a space. It means you have to have conduit, and conduit that'll go to the electrical room of the major building. That does not mean that you have to install the actual charging station or the electrics that go with it in the building. So those are the kinds of things that are not resolved. All this discussion is currently going on with UTC, PSC, and others about how is this going to work, who's going to pay for these, and where do they go. So you're going to start seeing some of this sort of evolve with some answers later this year, and you're going to see more installation of EV stations in 2023. That's where the big push is going to be. Last time I looked, PSC was designating $26 million for EV stations. And if you go on, you take a look at some of the maps, you have quite a few in the Bellevue area. And as you go further south, fewer and fewer. But if you've looked around City Hall lately, they just installed some more. So definitely you're going to see more of these in the near future. We did not make that a priority, but it's coming forward and we're spending quite a bit of time on it. but that's what it looks like. If you're okay with it, we'll bring it back when you're less busy. Is that okay with the commission?
Yep.
That way you
Great.
can look at this and we can go through it in more detail.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Bueller. Appreciate it.
Am I under 10 minutes?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
So thank you for your time.
Thank you. So, Mr. Larson.
I really appreciate the overview. It's a nice contextual deal, and you did it without notes. And I sort of know, I know that you know this stuff inside and out, and it's wonderful to have you in command of it. So we're looking forward to our mutual progress.
Right. There's one more thing. There is the Pierce County Sustainability Collaborative. It's just getting formulated with all the cities and how this is all going to work. So they only meet quarterly. They've been thinking about holding more recent meetings, but that's one of the goals, was to get involved in a countywide discussion of this. So it is happening. And again, it's hard for us to stay up on all of the movements. So again, thank you.
Thank you. No, does that mean no? No comments. Okay, any other further comments from staff?
Just very quickly, Mr. Chair, don't forget next Monday night is the joint session with City Council. So the 23rd, that meeting starts at 7 p.m. And just as these meetings are being held hybrid, you can do hybrid that night as well. So you could be here in person or remote, whichever will be more accessible for you. And then also just a reminder, in June, there will be 3 meetings. It's on the 1st, the 15th, and then on the 29th as well. And then once we get into July, there'll be 2, and then August, you'll have off completely. So that's it.
Great. And Mr. Pearson, is that correct? You're going to be in attendance on Monday?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Any other comments? Hearing or seeing none, we'll call the Planning Commission adjourned.
Thanks. See you guys.
Thank you. Whoa. That was a intense.
Yeah, I can't make it on Monday. Got a school board meeting tonight. What's that?
Okay, Mr. Stoll.
Yeah. Thanks, Karen.
Never mind all of that.